interesting in this. Uh, Although I do make jokes and have things a bit silly, this is a very powerful tool, and I have a ton of good information and valuable information here as well. But before we get too far into the topic, I want to give a quick intro of who I am and my role in the Marketing Cloud community. So, hello all. Many of you may know me from my alias Gortonington, which is what I had used for many years inside of Salesforce Stack Exchange. I was lucky to become popular enough that I then used that nickname for my blog, gortonington.com, which I used to post multiple articles around cool things related to marketing cloud engagement. Recently, I have been writing articles around leadership and marketing cloud, which then ties into a sister series that I helped implement in the community group, How to SFMC, which I founded along with a few other amazing marketing cloud experts to provide a community for us all, led by the community. It is a Slack first community, kind of like how Emo Geeks is, which is another one I'd highly recommend getting involved in, where you're able to interact with a range of people from MVPs all the way to day zero beginners. With the shared knowledge, conversations, networking, it helps to make the community a stronger and more knowledgeable place. I also have been a Salesforce MVP since 2019 and a marketing champion since the program inception, as well as a community group leader over the past couple of years. I did write the book Automating Salesforce Marketing Cloud, which has been a well-received overview on how to automate inside and outside of Marketing Cloud engagement. And then I currently am employed at Merkle as a Senior Director of AMER Messaging Solutions with a focus on Salesforce Marketing Cloud. All right, enough about me. Let's get to the stuff everyone is here to hear about. So, as I'm sure you guessed, this is going to be a bit out of the normal quote unquote professional presentation, but my goal is to present in a different way than normal to hopefully help those like me whose minds don't pick things up on the normal way and instead need something a little different to fully digest or get invested. Essentially, we're going to go over 4 different sections. You can see the boring professional names in parentheses underneath, but I'm going to read them in the fun, exciting, and hopefully helpful titles. So first start out with I totally get it, but can you explain it for my friend? Where we kind of go over what WS Proxy is and give a good in-depth introduction to it. Then we move to do what now, which is the basic how it works, what it does, the overview of the syntax of it as well, and then we do the but why, where I go over use cases and examples to kind of go over why you would use this tool and what you would use it for. And then we're going to finish up with you done messed up Ron, which is going to go over the gotchas and the tips and tricks and kind of things to help optimize your usage of it as much as possible. So we are going to move first into I totally get it, but can you explain it for my friend? So you're going to notice on this slide, I have this weird ass little picture over in a corner. So you might be going, what is that? I've been working a lot on Stable Diffusion, which is a generative AI for images. And I decided at a whim to just kind of go on and see what it would come up with on the very simple prompt of just WS Proxy. And this by far was the coolest of the results, so I thought I'd share. For those that might be a bit nerdy like me and are interested inside of it, I put all the details on how I got the image below there. So I'm sure the deck will be shared out. You can use that to mess around with on your own. But back to the actual presentation. In summary, WS Proxy or Web Service Proxy is a scripting object in Marketing Cloud that acts as an intermediary between server-side JavaScript and Marketing Cloud SOAP-based web services. This makes it easier for developers to interact with and manipulate data and objects within Marketing Cloud. Not only does this make it easier in that it simplifies the syntax by using a more native JavaScript type syntax, but it also helps to streamline many aspects of it, like authentication and session management, allowing for a more performant and efficient connection. as well as more secure. As a note, WS Proxy, due to its interaction with the web service, though, is not available in sendable contexts like email. It is only available in non-sendable places like script activities or cloud pages. Next, we're going to go into what it can do via the SOAP API. So as noted, WS Proxy goes through the web service, which is the SOAP API. So its capabilities are through the SOAP API capabilities. And I do want to note this is not an exhaustive list. This is on the vast majority, though, the capabilities that you will be using WS Proxy for. So we're going to start with retrieving data. This is honestly where the majority of usage is coming from. Most people use it to get data from data extensions, pull data from SOAP objects like send-event or similar for tracking data, or many more options. Then next is updating and creating data. This as well is not limited to just data or data extensions or lists, but also creating objects like automations, triggered send definitions, filters, and many more things. Then, of course, there's deleting data. Sometimes there's a need to be a culling of outdated outdated objects or data. So with WS Proxy, you can programmatically and automatically set up a retention on near anything to keep your instance lean and healthy. Then there's performing actions. Yes, it can also schedule start automations, send emails, segment data through filters or queries, and much more. Now that we had a quick overview on what we can do powered by SOAP API, let's see the quick benefits to the integration into server-side JavaScript compared to using the platform functions or raw XML SOAP calls. So there is the simplified syntax, which utilizing native JavaScript object and array syntax, including JSON, is much more concise and performant than the building and utilizing the raw XML structure of SOAP calls. It removes the manual translation as well between the languages for it to work and handles this automatically. Then there's error handling, utilizing built-in error handling capabilities. It can catch SOAP defaults and return server-side JavaScript exceptions that you can handle through server-side JavaScript, such as the use of try-catch or conditional statements, etc. Then there's performance. By optimizing the calls to the web service via the proxy, it greatly reduces a lot of the overhead and batches multiple calls together. Then there's the reusability. WS Proxy is easily made into functions or similar repeatable actions, which allows for greater code efficiency and reusability in other scripts without major changes. Then, of course, we have security. It provides a safe interface for interacting with SOAP API by abstracting the SOAP protocol and authentication. So next, I'm sorry, I just flung through this. Here we go. Next up, we're going to go into the basic syntax overview of do what now. So for the basic syntax, we're going to be going over these following 6 sections. We got move from XML to server-side JavaScript, the JSON format for calls and responses. The SOAP methods are now functions, objects and properties, batching and pagination, and then the dot notation for the results. So we're going to go first, like I said, move from XML to server-side JavaScript. WS Proxy is natively built into JavaScript, or in this case, server-side JavaScript. So it utilizes the same syntax and language when interacting with the web service as well as the server, making things much easier and reducing unnecessary translations. Prior to this, you only had 2 other options, creating a raw SOAP envelope inside server-side JavaScript, or AMP script, and then using HTTP posts to send it, or utilizing the internal server-side JavaScript AMP script functions built for this. Each had major drawbacks in usage, especially in comparison to WS Proxy. So SOAP when making a SOAP call directly in server-side JavaScript without using WS Proxy, you would need to manually build it, including the headers and body elements, which are fairly robust. That can bloat your code and make it difficult to edit, maintain, and reuse, as well as it offers up some of the more sensitive data, such as the client ID and secret, that need to be involved in there and things along those lines. Now, next option is the function calls. Now, this one, it doesn't require the same level of openness on including the client ID and secret, but there are other limitations. And not only that, it builds it through row sets. So there's like AMP script runs through where you'll notice that when it returns, you have to go through, you get a row count inside of a row set, and then you have to select a row, and then inside that row, you then have to select a field. And it's built in that way where that's how it contains data. So the SOAP is not built that way. So there's a translation there. And in order to translate it back and forth, it will require multiple different functions. You'll notice that, and then it's got like the create object, add object to array, and like all of those where it's got about like 6 or 7 different functions involved inside of making the simple API calls, which can then get convoluted and bloated, and it's much more limited than you would be able to do in WS Proxy because those only work inside of the current business unit that you're in. As far as I know, there's no way to transfer or impersonate into another one like you can in WS Proxy. So here's a couple quick examples just to get a look at it and show the difference. In here, I've got a simple one of on WS Proxy. It's just a describe with an not sent event. And then we've got over on the right side, just a very generic example of a quick build of the SOAP envelope. And I'll be honest, this one is really tiny in comparison to what you would actually be building. But even that tininess is still giant next to, and you can see too, you got to build it as a string. You're not able to build it as XML. It's a bit of a rough mess. And then here it is with the platform functions. You'll see here you got the create object, add object array item, all of those things in there to try and build it out as a row set and build it inside of a language that is not really made to work with XML natively. On to the next, JSON format for calls and responses. The JSON format used in WS Proxy is a way to structure and represent data in a standardized format. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation and is widely used for data interchange between a client and a server. In the context of WS Proxy, JSON is used to define the structure of the request and response objects sent and received during API calls. It's important to note that the exact structure of the JSON objects used in WS Proxy may vary depending on the specific API call and its parameters. Therefore, it's essential to refer to the Salesforce Marketing Cloud API documentation or specific API method documentation for the correct JSON structure for each API call. So as you can see here, there's a couple different things noted along with that. You got the object structure, which is basically the key value pairs encased inside of the curly braces. The key is always a string, but the value can be one of multiple different data types. Then there's arrays, which you'll be able to see there are a list of items inside of square brackets. They can contain also multiple objects or values. Then there's the different data types. That's strings, numbers, booleans, objects, arrays, and null. Then there's nested objects where you can have an object inside of an object, which creates kind of a hierarchical structure. This is definitely useful for when you have to represent different complex data structures or relationships. Then there's the last two are kind of just abilities they can use on it. There's stringification for when you need to take the JSON and turn it into a string format to make it more human readable and be able to output it in different areas and things like that. And then you can conversely take it where if it's a string, you can turn it into a JSON, whether it's an object or array, using the parse JSON function inside of server-side JavaScript. So here, SOAP methods are now functions. So I think this is all, or at least the vast majority of the different methods. As shown here, each method is now contained as a function inside of WS Proxy on the quote unquote like main proxy object that you initialize. This makes it extremely easy to implement as well as to read what is going on. As you may have noticed, some of them have like item or batch following them. This is to account for if you need to batch create, update, delete, etc., or if it's only for a single item. This can help with performance and processing by batching multiple calls into a single one, and also helps remove the need for it to review and look for batching if you're just looking for a single. So it's basically to streamline the capabilities and let it know should it be looking for an array inside of what you're pushing up there inside of the payload, or should it be looking for an object and pushing that through. It's a really super awesome, helpful thing. You also notice there's like execute, describe, and then get next batch. Get next batch we'll go into in a little bit more detail, but there's a lot of cool new feature, or not necessarily new, cool features. It's been a couple of years now. WS Proxy has been around, so it's not as new as it was before, but lots of awesome features that are available out there. So next up are going quickly over some of the objects and properties and how they work in this without going too deep into it though. It's all of the SOAP objects and properties. I wanted to kind of address that these are all reflected from the ones inside of raw SOAP. So like it's not separate WS proxy objects and properties and SOAP objects and properties. It's all one and the same. So when you go into the documentation and you look up SOAP objects, those are the same as what you would interact with on WS proxy. It will take each of the objects. I have on the left here some of the more popular ones to kind of show examples, but by no means is that an exhaustive list. I think there's like over 100 something objects available inside of SOAP API for engagement. So by no means is this all of the things you can touch. And then each of those objects will then have their own properties inside, which you can kind of think of these like columns inside of a data extension where you have the object being the data extension that you're looking at, let's say master DE, and then the properties are like first name, last name, email address, that kind of stuff. So those vary depending on the object. They can be very unique. Some are shared, some are completely separate and only available in that specific area. But it's each one of those that are accessible via the raw SOAP calls are also accessible in WS Proxy. The way to find these, I put a couple things here. There's the official documentation. These are actually fairly well documented in there. And then you can also use a describe SOAP call or WS proxy call to that object, and it will return each of the properties in there, as well as if it's writable, readable, all of that fun stuff. Next up, batching and pagination. So as is possible in raw SOAP calls, you are able to do batching via retrieve and via create, update, delete. As you'll see though, there's a mention of batch size inside of options, and it's really neat and it's something that is available in SOAP, but it's something that is almost universally ignored in WS Proxy. This is one of the few times that there isn't parity between the two. I have heard from some people they've got it to work inside of certain objects. I have not had any luck with it, but I wanted to notate it just in case it works for you. But the batching, that's for retrieving. Batching on create update is utilizing the method batch, kind of like how we saw with the create batch, retrieve, or I'm sorry, not retrieve batch, delete batch, update batch, all that kind of stuff. Those functions, along with an array of objects to fit into that specific object and method. Then we got pagination. So this is the one that's actually going to be using the get next batch function that we saw. a little bit earlier, and that's going to be teamed up with the request ID from the original batch. I'm sorry, the original call. You can continue to the next quote unquote page of these records you're reviewing using that function. This is only affecting returned returned objects or results. You will see a flag in the property of that returned object of has more rows. If it's true, that means that you can go to the next page and retrieve the next batch. If it's false, then that means that's the end of the results and there's no more pages available. And then we get the dot notation result. So for this, WS Proxy works in JSON format, and in order to access the nested data within it, you need to use dot notation. So what is dot notation? It's accessing the nested data with periods, which are dots. For example, you would have like object dot property, and that would retrieve the value of that property. So like if we had an object that we were storing in a variable of cars, and then we had name as the property or the key, and then the value of that was Ford. We would then return cars dot name, and that value would be Ford, and that's how you would be able to access those. And the other part of it, though, is that there is an array version of it. The array does not work like the object because it does not have the key value pairs. It is based off of an indexed list of items. So you would need to use the actual square brackets there. And inside of those square brackets, you would put the index of what you want to return. So the array will stick with cars. Cars is the array, that the variable name that's holding our array. And in that array, we have Ford, and then comma, next is Chevrolet, comma, BMW, etc. So we've got a good amount of items there. Now, huge thing to note, arrays in server-side JavaScript are zero index. What is zero index? Zero index means that the first item is actually zero, where you would see inside of like a lookup row or something along those in AMScript, first item is number 1. Inside of arrays in JavaScript, it's 0. So you would have to do, if you want to return Ford, you have to do cars, square bracket with a 0 in the middle, and that would return the first item, which was Ford. So here's a quick little visual to help show what I was talking about a bit better. So this way there's a visual look to go along with the explanation. All right, and then next we're going to move to the use cases with but why. So first use case, data retrieval. WS Proxy can be used to retrieve data from various objects in Marketing Cloud. You can query and retrieve data from data extensions, subscribers, lists, data views, and other objects using the WS Proxy retrieve method. So yeah, here's a quick example code to kind of go over how to do that. You see we initiate the WS Proxy object with the variable of prox, and then we have to list the specific columns, which are the properties that we need to return from the object. We have our simple filter there to get, so we only return what we need. And then it goes into options, batch size. Again, doesn't work, but I put it in there just to show it. And like I said, some people have it working. So I don't know if there's some special magic thing that I haven't figured out. Maybe I'm not, leaving the right offerings to the gods or something. But the next is where we get the actual call, where we use the proxy initialization that we had, dot retrieve to run that method, and we run it on the subscriber object, and then we have the columns, filters, and options added on into that function that will then return the first page of the records. Next, we go into data manipulation. So WS Proxy allows you to create, update, or delete data in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. You can use the WS Proxy perform method to perform actions such as adding or updating subscribers, creating or updating records and data extensions, and more. So here's a couple example codes. We've got on the left, you'll notice we have the retrieve objects from identified SOAP, optional filter. So it retrieve generic. It's similar to like we were showing. Then we've got the one here in the middle, which is the create. You'll notice that I have in each of these, I have a conditional where right underneath where it says set client ID. Sorry, above where it says set client ID, where it has if MID, where if it passes an MID in, then it resets it, puts it to 0, mills it out into the current place that you're at, and then you set the client ID through prox.set client ID, which will then set which MID you want to be in. And then it'll also look to, is it an array? And if it's array, then it'll go through create batch, else it'll go through create item. And then here on the right side is it'll go into how to delete. It uses very similar as what you would see inside of the others. It's just slightly different. All right, and then next is automation. So WS Proxy can be used in automation scenarios to perform tasks such as importing data, syncing data between systems, sending emails, and managing subscriber lists. You can build custom scripts or workflows using WS Proxy to automate these tasks. So again, got a couple examples here. Each one is going to be on the left is perform it, one in the middle is pause it, and then of course we're going to retrieve. So these are all based off of automations. You'll see in the perform, we use the perform item method on there, and we have the action of start. Looks like I accidentally copy and pasted the same thing for the pause and the start. The action is different. It's not supposed to be start. I believe the value that's put in there is paused. Apologies for putting the wrong thing in there, but it's essentially the same call with one minor change. And then we've got all the way on the right is the retrieve, where you go through, and the way that it was set up, automation requires you to actually, in order to get all of them, to pull off of the status, and then you list all of the available statuses as an in operator, and that will retrieve all of the automations inside of the automation object. Then we got use case D, custom reporting. So WS Proxy can be used to retrieve data from data views or other objects in Marketing Cloud, allowing you to create custom reports and dashboards. You can fetch specific data points, apply filters, and aggregate data as needed. Here's a quick example using the not sent event. You'll see we've got a describe on it in the beginning that will then let us see which ones are retrievable or not, and we'll be able to then use that to pull the information back through the retrieve. We'll have the send columns, which is what was gathered from there, on the send object, which is the not send event with our filter on it, which I don't believe we had a filter written out. So this would return everything. And that will then give you all the information from inside of the not sent event to be able to utilize in whatever way to show reports of, hey, these emails were sent to, and this is why, and send that report out. And that's something that isn't easily native in the platform to gather. So we'll move next to use case E, and that's personalization and segmentation. WS Proxy allows you to retrieve subscriber data and leverage it for personalization and segmentation purposes. You can fetch subscriber attributes, preferences, and engagement history to create personalized experience and targeted campaigns. So here's a couple. This is actually a single example. It is going through and actually building an email send definition to match the need there. And you'll see it's got through the var ESD object over on the left side. It lists out all of the information associated with the email send definition inside of that object that you then pass through inside of the prox.create item to actually create that email send definition. And then we grab the customer key from it, and then you can go down, and after you set that up in another object for properties of it, you are then able to actually do the .perform item where you actually can send that email send definition right away. So, as shown by the above use cases and examples, there is a ton of things you can accomplish utilizing WS Proxy. For example, you can use it to retrieve data from a data extension, update the records on specific conditions, and then create new records in another data extension based on the transformed data. Overall, WS Proxy provides developers excuse me, with the flexibility and control to perform advanced data manipulation operations in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. Now on to our final section. You done messed up, AA Ron. So there's just a couple tips and tricks. First thing I always recommend is turn every single action into a server-side JavaScript function. By turning your proxy script into a function, it allows for reusable boilerplate code that is uniform in approach and can be used multiple times in a single script without repeating the code, as well as easily transported to a different script or environment. So like here, we have the function to get all DE info. So you just run this through, and this will give all the information about every data extension that is available. So all you have to do is you copy that top part, which is the function get all DE info with the MID from that bracket down to the bottom. And then all you have to do is paste it into wherever you want on the script. And then you call it like you do at the bottom with the var all DEs equals get all DE info. And that will work across the board on every single non-sendable instance. You can just copy and paste that across and it'll work, no problem. And then we've got the type property from SOAP inside of WS Proxy. So you'll notice sometimes inside of the nodes of SOAP API, inside of the XML, they'll use like the type equals XYZ or whatever, complex filter part, simple filter part, all those kinds of things. This is not something you will find out how to replicate inside of WS Proxy in the documentation. But you can solve for it by using the underscore underscore type underscore underscore property. Yes, 2 underscores before and after. And that will then allow you to create and build in a similar way that you would inside of the XML. This is important, especially inside of filter parts and things like that, because without those in there, you're not actually able to build it. So this was something that has been found by the community. I believe it was first actually brought to my attention on it through Stack Exchange. I believe Adam Spriggs is the one that brought it to me. So that's something to keep in mind and be aware of. I believe there is another 1 or 2 that are like this that are you should be aware of and look for, and most of them you can find with a quick Google search to figure out if you need it. So then there's the impersonation option in the function. So including a conditional to consider impersonation, you can add even more versatility to your WS Proxy functions, allowing for a more efficient and future-proof coding, as you can easily and quickly flip between contexts using the same function. Here, I marked in blue what I was talking about. This is where we are showing inside of the previous example where I kind of went through, where you just pass along an MID, and that's then the business unit that you would have this function running in. One thing to note about it, though, is most of the impersonation is top down. You cannot impersonate a parent or a sibling from a child. So you would have to have these codes up inside of the parent account in order for it to go and interact inside of those other accounts. But by adding that in, it allows you the versatility to be able to use that in multiple areas and not have to write multiple functions, one for, business unit one for business unit two, or anything like that. It allows much more versatility in that way. And then we've got the retrieve and the create/update payloads are different. What you retrieve back from like a data extension, let's say, is not going to be able to just then be copy and pasted as, hey, now create this. There actually is a difference in what's accepted and what's provided. So yeah, if you push it into a create, it'll be an error, despite it all being valid information. So to get around that, you will need to do manipulations on the retrieve to shape it as something that create/update will be able to read. For this issue around retrievable but not writable properties, you can usually utilize like the delete command, which is shown there with delete field object.myField to remove it from the object prior to pushing it to the create update action. This means that there needs to be exploration and understanding of each call, regardless of same object, as different actions may have different property requirements and capabilities. In my blog, I do have an example code for copying a data extension via WS Proxy. I think this is a great example of having to manipulate a retrieve payload in order to then use it for the create update payload. So if this is something you're interested in, I would highly recommend going and taking a look at that. And then we've got a couple helper functions that I like to share out as something that makes life easier. And I'm going to pass three of them along. Two of them, though, I actually took from Ivan Razine's SSJS docs.xyz project, as they were actually simpler versions of the same thing I did. So thought I'd share the best instead of just what I created. But these two functions are WS pack and the WS unpack functions that you will see. So first one is the get retrievable columns. I actually showed this inside of one of the previous examples where it goes and does a describe on the SOAP object to get the results, you get the properties, and then you use a for loop to loop through and find the ones that are retrievable. And then that pushes it into an array of field names that you can then use as, not field names, of columns that you can push in for the retrieve to that object to get back everything that's inside of it. It's so much easier than having to go, okay, let me go over and look at the documentation. Okay, it has this column, this column, this column. Surprisingly, the official documentation does not say if it's retrievable or not. So you may see all these awesome fields. You're like, yes, I want all of those. You push it in there, and then the SOAP call returns, sorry, that's not a retrievable field. Can't call this. So then you have to go back and you have to try and mess around and figure things out. And this just removes all of that hassle. You just run this function, gets all the retrievable fields, pop that in, send it through, and it'll retrieve all of the information you can from it. Next is the WS pack. So this takes and splits an object into name value pairs for WS Proxy. So there's times that when you get the information back, it's not set up like this where you'll see, and by name value pairs, I mean literally the object contains a name key and then the value of the name key, and then a comma, and then value as the key, and then the object value there. So that is not a normal format. It's usually like, retention, and that is the key, and then 5 days is the value. So this actually has name be the key inside of that object. So in order to set it up that way, because some of the stuff needs it set up in that specific way in order for it to be brought in, this function helps you be able to build that quickly without losing your mind and tearing out all of your hair. Unfortunately, I don't have any left, so there's no hair for me to tear out. But for those of you that still have hair, things like this will help you retain it. And then in the other way, this will take those that are separated out in those name value pairs, like we saw with the pack, and turn it into a single object where we'll go from the name and the value into just actually shifting the name value is the key, and the value is the actual value of that key. So it's another way to help reduce a lot of headaches there. So those are the three quick helper functions I wanted to go over. There are hundreds and hundreds of them out there, all of them amazing. I just wasn't able to get them all into a single presentation without probably boring you guys to death. So at that, though, I am going to thank you all for coming and listening to me speak. And I believe we've got a few minutes left at the end if there's any questions or anything that you guys want to go over.
Thank you very much, Greg. This has been very informative and also fun and lovely. Thanks for making it so interesting. And thanks for the bonus at the end, the tips and tricks that are really helpful. And I'm sure all of us have something to learn from this session. For the beginners in the WS Proxy, there is a lot to learn from your session. Thank you very much, Greg.
Well, thank you for having me.
Everyone, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat window. We do have a few minutes. So in the meantime, I would like to inform you about the upcoming sessions. We're planning for 12 hands-on sessions. So we have some few builders already lined up. So if anybody else wants to participate in the hands-on sessions, please let me know. And the challenge for today's session is try to build any of the use cases that Greg has discussed now. It can be creating the data extension or updating or deleting the data extensions or anything, any one of the use cases that Greg has mentioned. Try to replicate that in your org and share it with us on the Slack channel. So we will pick the best one. And if you do not have access to the MC org, there is one alternative. Let us know the benefits of the WS Proxy, where you can use it, the use cases. So you can share all these things in the Slack channel, the dedicated channel for it as SSJS Bootcamp and challenges. Post them in that specific channel. And I don't see any other questions. Any questions post this session, please feel free to post them in the Slack channel. So I will be sharing the recording at the earliest possible. So the takeaway for you is I will follow the recording if needed one more time and try to replicate this in your org. Now I see one question, Greg. Which one is better in terms of retrieving data using AmpScript or WS Proxy?
So I'm going to assume by AmpScript you mean like the lookup functions and those types of things, not the raw. So I would say it really depends on what you're trying to do. In a sendable context, absolutely AmpScript, because you can't use WS Proxy there. But AmpScript lookups are good for kind of a tactical approach in gathering data. If you're doing a simple personalization or you need just a specific data set, then by all means it's going to be faster. Like a WS Proxy and server-side JavaScript are a bit slower in general compared in languages, but the robustness and the complexity you can get out of WS Proxy make it a highly valuable option. So like if you're looking to get data from things outside of a data extension, WS Proxy all the way. If you're looking to get very specific or a large batch outside of the 2,500 limit that's on AmpScript, WS Proxy all the way. I know it's not a full definitive answer, but in general, it's both in specific areas.
That helps. Thanks, Greg. Any other questions? You have got a few minutes. So this is an opportunity to talk to Greg directly and get your questions answered. So I don't see any other questions, Greg. I think we can wrap up the session. This has been so wonderful. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It was great talking to you all.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.